Coming up on The Disturbance, I've got my big AFC South National Football League preview show for you today. We will talk about the Indianapolis Colts. I'll explain to you why Matt Ryan is really at the end of his career. Seriously, Indianapolis, why do you keep bringing in quarterbacks that are clearly skiing down the backside of Career Mountain? I have the stats to prove that Matt Ryan is almost to the chalet, if you know what I mean. We'll also talk about Derrick Henry, the Tennessee Titans, the whole Malik Willis, Ryan Tannehill controversy, and we'll also talk about Jonathan Taylor. This particular division has the two best running backs in the National Football League statistically, and they are both very similar runners. Can't wait to talk about Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry. We'll also talk about the best beard in all of sports. Sorry, James Harden, but Lovie Smith, the head coach of those Houston Texans, has you beat. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Lovie Smith, as a head coach in the National Football League with the Chicago Bears between 2004 and 2012, went 81-63. I bet a lot of you out there didn't realize how successful Lovie Smith was as a head coach in the National Football League. That includes 3 division titles, 2 NFC Championship games, and an appearance in an actual Super Bowl. The Texans did the right thing. They brought in a legitimate head coach to deal with Davis Mills, who might actually be the better rookie quarterback or the better second-year quarterback than one Trevor, a.k.a. Joey Lawrence in Jacksonville. Speaking of Jacksonville, we'll also talk about the Urban Meyerless Jaguars. I'll get into my thoughts and opinions on how they spent $100 million on wide receivers. If you think there's pressure on any other second-year quarterback outside of Trevor Lawerance, you would be incorrect. He is going to have to get better if Jacksonville is going to be successful this year. We've got that plus a whole lot more coming up on the big show today.
Live and on tape from the heart of Silicon Valley, this is The Disturbance, hosted by Dave Daba. Now to the host, who can't stop ripping on players, coaches, and unbelievably bad front office management, Dave Daba.
It is super late night on a Tuesday, August 23rd of the year 2022. I'm Dave Daba, and thanks so much for joining me on The Disturbance today. All right, it is our big AFC South National Football League preview show. We will talk about the Houston Texans and Lovie Smith in just a little bit. We'll also cover the Urban Meyerless Jacksonville Jaguars, which is a good thing for everybody in the National Football League. We'll get into that. We'll talk about Jonathan the Hitman Taylor and the Indianapolis Colts, who should be a team that is able to challenge for this particular division title. But first, we begin with the team that I believe is actually going to win this division, and that is Mike Vrabel and his Tennessee Titans. Now, you all know what I think about good coaching in both the NBA and the National Football League, and you all know that I think it's imperative. Now, Mike Vrabel hasn't been with this team for 10 years yet. Mike Vrabel's spiel is still sort of coming across to the players, especially when you talk about a Tennessee Titan team that allowed A.J. Brown, one of the premier wide receivers in the National Football League, to basically just walk out the door. It is hard to believe that A.J. Brown, a talent at that level who is so young, is no longer with this Tennessee Titans football team. But that is what the Tennessee Titans are all about, which is discount football. And so they are playing their own brand of discount football. Mike Vrabel traditionally is able to keep the pieces together. You just watch. Throughout this season, the Tennessee Titans will always be in a playoff position. They'll either be a game out or they'll be a game above making it into the playoffs. That's because Mike Vrabel knows how to put the pieces together and how to get the most out of his discount, the discount team that the Tennessee Titans traditionally put on the field. Like, nobody is going to actually look at this Tennessee Titan team and say, on paper, nobody's going to say that about the Tennessee Titans. Now, Derrick Henry, we know, is great. We know he's coming back from his injury. All things appear to be heading in the right direction for Derrick Henry. So you can expect a big season out of Derrick Henry for sure. I'm not going to go out and say that he's going to, rush for 2,000 yards again, but he's still going to be an intimidating factor and an important factor to this particular football team. They picked up Robert Woods, who is one of my favorite wide receivers from the Los Angeles Rams, also coming back from an injury. And for those Titans fans out there, I'm sure you all went out and bought your Austin Hooper jersey, didn't you? All right. And then the big news on this particular team, two big pieces of news. One is Treylon Burks, their 18th draft pick in the first round of the National Football League draft, showed up at camp a little chunky. But apparently is doing better after a couple weeks of running in the heat. But it is a fact that I did want to point out. Like, can you imagine you're a professional football player and you just got drafted into the National Football League? Don't you do everything to make a great first impression with your team? I'm just saying. It just doesn't make any sense to me. That being said, the big controversy, though, is Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis. Now, I think we've all been in a position where you've started a career at some point. And at the beginning of your career, you've looked to other people to assist you and teach you the ropes. It is what happens in life. And for Ryan Tannehill to basically come out and say that he's not there to be a tutor or mentor to Malik Willis, the young quarterback coming into this football league, is absolutely 100% ridiculous. I said it on another podcast a couple months ago, but I would have immediately began the trade talks for Ryan Tannehill. Now, all joking aside, Ryan Tannehill is a very serviceable quarterback. He's very good at handing the ball off. He's very good at the screen pass. He's very good at checkdowns. Ryan Tannehill does struggle, as do a lot of quarterbacks in the National Football League, in throwing the ball actually way downfield. And there's several reasons for that. But that being said, I think Ryan Tannehill is still a top 20 quarterback in the National Football League and deserves to have a starting role in the NFL. It's just that this Malik Willis kid just looks like he could be something special. And I just want to make sure that in the National Football League, as you know, where you get drafted, the environment that you end up playing in matters. It absolutely matters. Just ask Sam Darnold. I'm just saying. So, Malik Willis is in an interesting spot because there is this older quarterback there who's semi-proven, who's done a good job leading this Tennessee Titan team to the playoffs in front of him. But Malik Willis is a big talent, and I predict that a lot of teams are going to regret at some point not taking Malik Willis in the National Football League draft. Moving on to the oldest man in football. No, I kid about Matt Ryan. He's not the oldest man in football. He just plays like the oldest quarterback in football. And that's exactly what the Indianapolis Colts want, right? The Colts are all about bringing in these old quarterbacks who are clearly skiing down the backside of career mountain. We talked about it in the intro. Not going to spend too much time on sort of talking about old Matt Ryan at this point. But when you look at his stats, and if you go back 3 years, you see steady declines. Now, if we just look at the QBR stat, you go from something in the mid-60s to something into the average speed limit on a freeway of 55 miles an hour, down into the 46.1 zone, if you will, of a QBR rating. Now, look, I know he didn't have a strong offensive line in Atlanta, so we need to be semi-fair to Matt Ryan about this. We do know that Matt Ryan's got a big arm still, and he's good at making decisions. And we think that Matt Ryan is actually, believe it or not, a step up from a much younger Carson Wentz, which leads me to all sorts of questions about the Washington Commanders this year. That being said, will probably do a really serviceable job as a quarterback for this Indianapolis Colts team, and that's what they were looking for. But how ironic will it be if we get to the last game of the season and the Indianapolis Colts have to win a game to get into the playoffs, and they can't do it, just like Carson Wentz, who was in complete fear last year of those Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, elsewhere on this football team, the undiscovered country for the Indianapolis Colts last year was Jonathan Taylor. It was almost as if they had no idea what they had with Jonathan Taylor, and once they figured it out, they just kept feeding him the ball. This is a balanced football team on both sides of the ball. Solid defense. I think, definitely could be competing for the division title, or could be something close to 500 this year because of the quarterback situation. When quarterbacks deteriorate, it happens quickly. And what we've seen with Matt Ryan over the last couple years indicates that has already happened and has started to occur. I loved Matt Ryan back in his day, in his prime, but I think we are well beyond his prime at this point. All right, moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Apologies to Lovie Smith and the Texans fans. We'll get to you in a minute. But the Jacksonville Jaguars are officially Urban Meyerless, which is a good thing for everybody in the National Football League. This Jacksonville Jaguars organization was a really strong organization when it entered the National Football League, and over the years has been a pretty good organization, but they have fallen on hard times over the last 6 or 7 years. So what do? They get rid of Urban Meyers, which was a good move. They bring in Doug Peterson to be their head coach, an experienced coach who's actually won a Super Bowl in the last decade. So they get that. Look, Doug Peterson is no Mike McCarthy, if you know what I mean, Dallas Cowboy fan. Doug Peterson will actually sit there and relate with the young players. That's one of the big things about Doug Peterson is he's an absolute players coach, and that's what's needed for the most part in the National Football League this year. So they went out and they said, we really believe in this guy, Trevor, a.k.a. Joey Lawrence, who threw for 3,600 yards last year, 12 touchdowns, and 17 picks for a QBR, wait for it, of 33.5. This is Sam Darnold territory. And there's so many people out there talking about, we saw Trevor have a couple good games towards the end of the year. there's hope. There's hope. What kills me about these teams is when they've got this young player like Trevor Lawerance, who clearly struggled, who clearly had issues last year. When a new regime comes in and they don't actually give him enough snaps during the preseason, and that's something that I think the Jaguars have missed out on. Like some of these guys, I know Sean McVay is changing the way the National Football League works with the preseason, but that doesn't work for everybody. And I don't think it works for some of these other young quarterbacks who really do need real live fire reps. And I think it's going to hurt Trevor Lawerance because he didn't get enough of that. It's, training camp's just not the same. I know what I'm talking about. I went to the Dallas Cowboy training camp in Oxnard this year. That's a different podcast entirely. So Trevor Lawerance has to pull it together. But so the Jaguars organization went out and spent just about $100 million and I like to use this carefully because it's not, all of that's not guaranteed, but it was a $72 million contract for Christian Kirk. And Zay Jones, who's one of my favorite young wide receivers that they stole from the Las Vegas Raiders. Well, I don't know if you can call it stealing when they paid him $24 million over 3 years. 47 receptions, 545 plus yards, and just 1 touchdown for Zay Jones. But he was a possession wide receiver, and he was the guy that Derek Carr relied on whenever they needed to get a first down. Zay Jones is a fantastic addition to this Jacksonville Jaguar team. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. You're like, DeBaugh, what the hell are you talking about? But look, I'm not talking fantasy football here, but if you're looking for somebody who's reliable, who's going to run really good patterns, who's actually going to work harder than anybody else on the team, Zay Jones is your guy, probably worth every single dollar. Christian Kirk as well, 982 yards last year, 5 touchdowns and 77 receptions. Put that together with Marvin Jones Jr. And you've got a really solid receiving core, and there's several other players worth mentioning. Now, Travis Etienne Jr. and James Robinson are going to be your running backs. Of course, 2 different style running backs. So on paper, James Robinson had a really good season last year as well. Almost 800 yards on 164 attempts for 4.7 yards per carry and 8 touchdowns. That's really respectable numbers for a team that, quite frankly, didn't get a lot of first downs last year. So that's a lot of hard running right there by James Robinson. So 2 different style running backs. Both can catch the ball out of the field, but out of the backfield. But I would expect Etienne Jr. To also occasionally turn into a wide receiver, if you know what I mean. So that's your Jacksonville Jaguars for the season. Do I think they're going to win more than 4 games this year? Yeah. Do I think they're going to win more than 6 games this year? I don't think so. But they certainly could be a team that is on the rise. We didn't even get into Travion Walker and the defense. Travion Walker is they're going to set him up for success and turn him into an edge rusher. I'm sure he'll have a good, will do well out there on the edge. A very quick first step for Travion Walker. All right, and finally in the AFC South, we have the team that can't stay out of controversy. Deshaun Watson's former team, the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans, thankfully did the right thing and said, look, we're getting rid of this guy. He does not represent what we want him, what we want a player to represent. He doesn't represent the Houston Texans shield, apparently, but still, apparently, it's no problem for Jimmy Haslam and the Cleveland Browns to do the absolute wrong thing and give him a guaranteed contract. I'm sure Spike Lee right now is working on Do the Wrong Thing, as starring the entire Cleveland Brown operations, front office, and ownership group. Deserves to be a big part of that, because absolutely ridiculous. Look, I believe in second chances, so I'm okay with him getting a second chance, but the guaranteed contract was ridiculous and unnecessary for Deshaun Watson. Okay, so now moving on to what's left in the Houston Texans. Look, the Texans have a nice young defense. They've got some really strong pieces there. Probably better at stopping the run than they are at in the secondary at this point. But the one thing that they did really right, was they hired Lovie Smith. Now, I covered his stats in the opening, and it's worth reiterating the fact that Lovie Smith, from 2004 to 2012, as the head coach of the Chicago Bears team, which, by the way, as we know, is not the strongest football organization in the world, is it? It just isn't. Sorry, Bears fans. You are not the Packers. You are not the current Los Angeles Rams. You do not put rosters together like the Los Angeles Chargers. You are the Chicago Bears, and you have been for a very, very long time. So during that era, Lovie Smith won 81-63 as a head coach, 2 NFC championships, and a Super Bowl appearance. Just a fabulous job as a head coach. Now, I kid about his beard, but what's amazing to me, at least in the National Football League, is that Lovie Smith has not had another chance to really be a head coach in the National Football League until now. He absolutely deserves it. He will do a fantastic job. He does a really good job molding young players. Be interesting to see what happens with Davis Mills, if Davis Mills actually takes a step forward with this particular team. 16 touchdowns, 10 picks, but a really bad QBR rating for Davis Mills as well, at 35.5%. Look, QBR is not everything, but when you only throw for 2,600 yards, that QBR does become very important. And basically what that means is, if you're going to throw for just 2,600 yards, you'd need to cut down on the interceptions. So for that QBR number to actually go up significantly, he'd have to throw less than 4 interceptions, not 10, and that's why the QBR number is so low for Davis Mills. Nice kid, strong enough arm, tends to make good enough decisions. Once again, rookie in the National Football League last season on a dysfunctional, on what was set up as a completely dysfunctional season for the Houston Texans. He persevered. He did a good job. It's like Derek Carr persevered last year too, but Derek Carr's been in the league forever. So you got to give it to Davis Mills, and I think we could see some additional good things out of him. Look, Brandon Cooks, who was a fantasy football darling back in the day, is still in the National Football League. And if you're wondering where he's been stranded for the last couple of years, it's with the Houston Texans. But last year, he, once again had over 1,000 yards, 90 receptions, and 6 touchdowns. Sort of back to that QBR number. The average reception was for 11.5 yards, and you're talking about a guy that is a deep threat. So that should sort of tell you a little bit something about his quarterback. That being said, I think Lovie Smith is not going to put together a team that's going to tank. This Houston Texans team is not going to tank. This is not going to be the worst team in the National Football League this season. Somebody else will. I'm not saying they're making the playoffs. I'm not even saying they come within 2 games of 500. Maybe best case scenario, they finish the season with 7 wins. I could see this team going 7-10, and that would be a really respectable 7-10. And with Lovie Smith, I could even see him sneaking into an 8-9 record at some point. He is really that good of a coach. Check back at the end of the year, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to Lovie Smith and this Houston Texans team. All right, that is it for our big AFC South National Football League preview show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Do check out our big sports website at disturbance.live. And seriously, can you believe the Indianapolis Colts went out and got the one quarterback in the National Football League that plays the oldest of anybody? He's not the GOAT. Tom Brady's still playing at an extraordinarily high level at 45. It's not about the age, it's about how he's playing. I wish Matt Ryan all of the luck, and you Colt fans as well. For the Disturbance, I'm Dave DeBaugh, wishing you all a tremendous rest of your sports viewing week.
The Disturbance is brought to you live and on tape from the heart of the Silicon Valley and is a production of the Mighty Rip Podcast Network. For more witty, 100% independent NFL and NBA sports coverage, check out our big sports website at disturbance.live.